Stop me if you've heard this before, but the implosion of IDW continues apace. They've had to do another round of layoffs for high-level executives, actually people with talent that we know can actually do a good job within the industry, once again abandoning one of their key strategies to reacquire some of that market share that they've lost along the way, as they've lost the Hasbro license, they lost the Star Wars Adventures license, they've lost quite a few licenses along with that. Very valuable licenses, as we've seen with what Skybound has done with Hasbro, specifically with G.I. Joe and Transformers. They've had a tremendous amount of success, yet they continue to keep the bad people around that are actually toxic to the brand, like a Heather Antos. And my good friend Aaron Sparrow and I were recording the Geek Fix exclusive to Patreon. If you're interested in that, there's a link in the video description. And the subject of IDW and the loss of licenses and the firing of Mark Doyle and others came up. And we ended up having a healthy conversation about it and ended up with an impromptu YouTube video on it. And I thought that conversation was really important, but I did want to give you some information on where it all kind of came from. You're going to see like 15 graphics, and this is just 15 random ones, of all the bad stuff that's happened in IDW over the past 5 years. And it is absolutely shocking that they're still in business at this point. IDW publisher Mark Doyle, the former Batman Group editor at DC Comics, has been let go by IDW Publishing. He is one of 4 staff members no longer with IDW, including in marketing, production, and the shipping department. It also looks like IDW might have lost their final Hasbro license in My Little Pony. From recent solicits and solicitations, there are also rumors they are losing the American Girl license after only producing 1 comic book, which is substantial because they don't have a lot of licenses left. They basically have TMNT, Star Trek, and then some other stuff, and My Little Pony would have been one of them. It comes with an audience with it, not only little girls, but you also get Brodies and all that kind of stuff. And certainly, I believe American Girl was supposed to also bring a young girl audience with them, and nothing really came about it, and it feels like people are pulling the licenses away, which is a black eye on Heather Antos, who is in charge of licensed products at IDW Publishing, but she remains hired. And someone with talent and an actual pedigree of success in comic books like Mark Doyle gets laid off for reasons unknown, but it's clear that they do not prioritize talent. Maybe they're prioritizing the cheaper pay rate and all that stuff that Heather Antos likely does receive because she isn't well thought of within comic books, not only within the fandom, but I can tell you within a lot of pros that do not want to work with her because they realize how bad she is. So very interesting stuff playing out here, and an awesome conversation with Aaron. I do hope you enjoy it. TMNT #1 did 300,000 according to IDW.
How many of those do you think sold to actual people? And by the way, what do you think issue 2 and 3 and 4 are going to do? Do you think that they're going to do 300,000? Why is if it's so successful, why is IDW having to abandon licenses? And why are they having to cut staff? And why are they having to reduce page rates? And why are they letting executives go? This isn't saving time. This is bailing water. So TMNT can be the huge success, and they can tout it all they want about how many copies they sold. But the fact of the matter is it's still just water that's being bailed out of their sinking ship. Heather Antos is the head of licensing, yet they're losing all their licenses. Is that a relationship problem? Is it a money problem? Is it a combination of all of them? What kind of plan do you think, what kind of proposal do you think Heather Antos is putting together with the licensees to save the company and to turn these things around and to make them successful? We've seen what she's done with Star Trek. She's buried it. So what confidence do I have in anything else? And eventually, are they going to be dumb enough to hand her the TMNT license? It seems to be the one license they've kept out of her hands, which maybe is why it sold 300,000.
You got to say this. I think they're doing more Star Trek comic books than they've ever done before, just as far as SKUs. It's just, the amount that they're doing might be adding up to what they were selling before that, because the stories are terrifically bad. And I like Star Trek a lot. I've tried to read a few of them, and they are horrendous when it comes to canon, but they're also horrendous when it comes to simple things like spelling and grammar errors. And I'm not the grammar police. And when it stands out like a sore thumb to me, you know that you probably should have used spell check a little better.
You should have done your job. You should have gone through it a few times. And here's the other problem is with them cutting page rates, with them cutting staff, you're going to get less talented people. So the talent level that you have now, as negligible as it is going to move on. And you're going to have to bring in worse people who work for less. That also plays into Heather Antos's wheelhouse because she does have a Rolodex full of very untalented, very cheap labor to bring in and write some really bad comic books. Yeah, who can't draw flies, much less customers. So, it's an Ouroboros of fail.
Well, and also the fact that I don't know that a lot of people are just clamoring to work on licensed product anymore. I think people have noticed that if you create your own stuff that you own, you have potentially a piece of the pie when it comes to streaming, movies, anything kind of like that. And a lot of people have made a lot of money. Well, guess what? If you were the G.I. Joe guy, or you were the Transformers comic book guy, or the Star Wars comic book guy, you have no stake in any of that stuff. It's a licensed product. You can work on something that you love, but you probably need to go do something else. So the talent pool of people just wanting to work on these properties as a means of a primary income and not just something that they're doing on the side because they love it or whatever is likely also greatly diminished.
Maybe this is patient zero. We'd have to go back and check. But do you remember when everybody hyped up Cameron Stewart before his scandal and Babs Tarr on Batgirl of Burnside? Do you remember when that was just the hottest book on the planet? And it was selling pretty good for a Batgirl book. And somehow, so much smoke was blown up their ass from that they convinced themselves that they were bigger stars. And they went off and did Motor Crush at Image. They left Batgirl, they left DC, and Motor Crush failed miserably. So there are people that can't bet on themselves because they don't have the audience, or they've misread the audience. So there's some people that are always going to have to try to work on licensed stuff. Like, do you think Dan Slott is ever going to be off of a Marvel book if he can avoid it? No, of course not, because Dan Slott knows that he can't go create something that people are going to be invested in. So he has to stay there, and there's a whole lot of people that will always be willing to work for the big two for almost nothing and have no stake in what they create, because either they love those characters, and that's how these companies get you. They sell you on the love. I was flat out told that at Boom one time when I said, this isn't enough of a page rate to get these people. And they said, sell them on the dream of working in comics, Disney comics. And it was like, yeah, that dream lasts until you can't pay your rent. And then all of a sudden, it's not really a dream anymore. So this is how these companies take advantage of people, but they're getting less and less talented people because the truly talented people go off and they establish something else. I have zero interest in working for the big two. That's not to say that I wouldn't take a title if they offered me something that I was interested in and that I wasn't going to get a lot of interference in. But I know what it is that I can do. I have a couple of friends that are editors for me that go ahead and they give me feedback, and I take it into account and I modify accordingly because I trust their opinion. But I'm not going to go take notes from a Heather Antos. I'm not going to go take notes from a Sarah Brunstad. There's absolutely no way that that's ever going to happen. Accordingly, I have no interest unless you're going to give me something and let me run with it, because I know what I can do.
You don't want to work for an editor like Annalise Bisa, who learned everything she knew about communism from X-Men inexplicably?
Yeah, that's what I want. Oh, God, can you imagine working on the X titles right now? Ooh. No wonder everybody said no. I'm reading them.
I can imagine how bad it is. I read Exceptional X-Men #1 already. And you know what's weird about all this stuff happening with IDW? They're losing some licenses. We had Mark Doyle leave. He was the Batman group editor that Tom King just completely, colossally fucked over. Really screwed him over. He got let go when they were kind of downsizing right before the pandemic and all that stuff. Goes over to IDW. He's seen as a coup because they brought him in, Jamie Rich, the guy that replaced him, and they're going to start up doing more creator-owned stuff, less licensed properties, because they realized with their portfolio, they're never going to be a media company. They needed more new ideas being created by good creators. And obviously Doyle being a Batman guy and Rich being a Batman guy who's already gone could bring some of those names there. And remember, they came out with all these titles that they were going to do. What happened 6 months later? They canceled half of them. And now he's out the door because it appears IDW doesn't have the funds or maybe the reputation within comic books to really attract any of that talent. They had to end up jettisoning him.
It's really tough. You can bring in talented people, but once the stink of death is on your company, that's a hard thing to shake. And that's where I fear that DC is starting to fall into. They're starting to fall into a death spiral of they can do no right. And people look at everything that they announce with a heavy level of suspicion and skepticism. And with IDW, it's the same. What could IDW announce at this point? First of all, they hired the Grim Reaper of comics. Heather Antos' name is death to comic fans. It's just, your average comic fan hears her name and they're just like, ugh. And they don't want to get involved. They don't want to support anything that she does. So, you've got some fans of Star Trek that'll still check out those books, and the true fans will hold their nose and try to suffer through it because they just love Star Trek so much. They just want some new Trek. But, mostly all you're going to attract the weirdos who don't care about the property and just want to see the identity politics crammed into something. Like Doc says, cultural locusts that just want to see everything devoured to the ground.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. A few years back, I'm a huge Valiant guy, and I love that Valiant universe. And, Dinesh got bought out. DMG Entertainment came in, and they ended up hiring Heather, I believe, from some sports betting thing that she was doing.
Her true dream, if you remember. She was living her true dream, but for some reason came back to comics.
Comes back to Valiant Comics. And I was looking at the numbers, and there's a direct correlation. Like the moment she shows up, within 60 days, the sales had halved. And the sales weren't that good to begin with because Valiant, quite frankly, was a niche product. So she kind of is the Grim Reaper. As soon as she shows up to IDW, what happens? They lose the Hasbro's license. They lose the Young Star Wars license and all that stuff. And I imagine the fact that she was fired from Star Wars by CB Cebulski and them realizing, wait, they just hired somebody that we fired because they weren't good enough to work on the Star Wars stuff that we license out to them. That's a terrible idea. Let's move it over to Dark Horse. They've gone through 3 or 4 rounds of cuts at IDW, and she's still there. The least talented person there that has the worst track record when it comes to success in comic books.
Well, not only that, but just has a terrible reputation amongst comic book buyers. When the audience knows that you hate them, they're not going to show up for you.
Do you mean to tell me that walking around Comic Cons with a Hail Satan 666 established fucking shirt isn't the way to go out there and introduce yourself and ingratiate yourself to comic book fans and just normies?
Or just general families that are walking around and might actually be interested in some of the properties that you have on your table. By the way, it's weird, right? That an editor is showing up with books that they haven't written, just stuff that they've edited and selling it. That's bizarre. She's the only person I've ever seen doing that. I've never seen just an editor, not a writer or a creator in their own right, show up with books that they edited on their table.
Are you saying people weren't clamoring to buy the Star Trek Pride Celebration issue?
I'm gonna say that I probably think that they weren't.
Wasn't that weird that they did that?
It's a niche audience within a niche audience. All of this Pride stuff is, it's just like how small of a demographic do you want to appeal to? Comic book fans in general are already a small demographic. Yeah. It's like what? But it's not about the money, Wes. It's about sending a message.
Yeah, but dozens of people are going to be interested in the idea that we're gonna change the world. It's like it doesn't really work like that. You actually have to go out there and get people to buy in on a much larger scale. But now they are losing. I know My Little Pony is one of the licenses that they're losing. There's another one that it's rumored that they're losing, American Girl, but I don't think they were doing anything really with that. But there is an audience that comes with My Little Pony. And it's not just little girls. It also comes with that Brody audience. So at least there was something to work with there. Now you've lost another audience that you could at least depend on showing up and looking at your weird My Little Pony comics.
They can't even sell Monster High comics, and Monster High has a very dedicated fan base. But part of the problem is they don't know how to reach out to these customers. They don't know who their customers are. They don't know how to reach out to them. So even if you're putting out a Monster High book, most people that collect Monster High will never even know that it exists because you don't know how to get it in their hands. And then once you do get it in their hands, they go, well, this is garbage.
When I think of Monster High, I think of women in between the ages of 35 and 45, never married, hardcore feminists with lots of cats that like to drink wine for lunch.
Being somebody who has sold Monster High dolls, I can tell you that it's a pretty wide range of fans, from young teenage girls up through the women you described and gay guys. So it's a fairly sizable demographic. There's a lot of girls that really love that stuff. A lot of young girls that you could get, into reading, and you could get into comics. Look, much as we got into comics by being enticed by G.I. Joe, a lot of us, it's like you saw the G.I. Joe commercials on there, buy the G.I. Joe comic, and you were like, holy crap, I can't wait to do that. And then you're down at the 7-Eleven or the Circle K or whatever you had around you, and you see that book on the rack, and you're like, 60 cents, I can afford that. And you grab that instead of a candy bar, and you go home and you read it and you get invested, and then you buy the next issue, and then you start looking in the back and you're like, who are these X-Men? Who are these Avengers that there's these ads for? These look cool. And maybe the next time you spend a little more of your allowance on comics, and pretty soon you're a full-blown Marvel zombie. And then from there you jump into DC and you develop this long-standing love affair with comics up until the modern day when they take your love out into a field and they just murder it right in front of you. You potentially could do that with a Monster High comic if you knew what you were doing. So IDW, sadly, because I hate to see talented people lose their job, but, they just keep doubling down on untalented people doing terrible work and continuing to shrink their company. I can't even believe that there's any investor money left to keep that place afloat. They so radically overpaid for the Ninja Turtles license because it is all they have, that it's actually leading to an even quicker apocalypse for them.
I don't even know what their priority is at this point. I think it's just cutting cost at every possible corner that they can find.
Maybe hiring somebody who doesn't really love comics, but just really loves being the most minor celebrity ever on Twitter. Maybe that's not a good decision. Maybe that's not a person to put in charge of the lines that you need to be the lifeblood of your company because you fired everybody who was working on original content.
Yeah, there will be no more original content for the most part at IDW, and they've been on their last legs for years. They wasted so much money trying to be a media company, lost tens of millions of dollars. They ended up getting bought out by one of their main investors. He's owed lots of money, and now they've kind of made their books look a little bit better by taking a private investment, but they haven't been able to really borrow money for years. They try to go public. That got shut down within a few months. To say that they're limping along would be a major understatement. At this point,
no, they're in hospice.
Yeah, they're on their last leg, and you're just kind of waiting for it to happen.
They're in hospice, and Heather Antos is Nurse Ratchet, just holding a pillow over their face.
I've been not only covering all the issues with IDW, but the weird career of Heather Antos, where everywhere she shows up, she gets promoted and things just fall apart. This is specifically what happened at Valiant, with a lot of great analysis pointing exactly how the sales data was impacted by her promotion and her arrival at Valiant, and why she never probably was worthy of this promotion to begin with. I talk about it in the video. Here it is right here. I hope you enjoy this and check it out. Really good stuff from back in the day in a different type of thinking critical video.